Hello, everyone. I am here today to talk about a re release, though for this channel, it will be the first time I am talking about this specific record by superstar Taylor Swift. This is Fearless Taylor's version, the 2021 re recording of her 2008 breakout smash hit record, which was released this past Friday on April 9th, 2021. So, the story behind why Taylor is re-recording this album is quite complex and one that we have now been following for a few years now. Swifties will remember that in 2019, Taylor unveiled to us in a very explicit post her issues and legal battles surrounding the rights to her masters, which are basically the recorded versions that she made for her record label Big Machine Records, which she signed to when I think she was 14, 15. Like, she was very young when she signed to this record label. And basically trying to buy those or to purchase those rights to those recordings from Scott Borchetta, who is the head of that label. He said that the only way that she could own them was for her to renew her contract with Big Machine, and she could trade in an album for one of her old records. So basically, she had to earn her way, basically to re-owning all of her past 5 albums. Keep in mind, at this point, she had already left Big Machine Records and signed to Republic Records for her upcoming 7th studio album, which was called Lover. And so she had no intention of returning to Big Machine, and rightfully so felt gypped out by the deal that Scott was offering her. And then, to add insult to injury, Scott Borchetta ended up selling a vast majority of the catalog of Big Machine Records, which included the masters for her first 6 albums, to Scooter Braun, the music media mogul, who we all know because of Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande and Kanye West. One of his publishing firms was able to acquire the royalties and the revenue from owning Taylor Swift's records. And this really upset Taylor, understandably so. I think it's really driven a wedge in the music industry. And it's really unfortunate to see. However, I do think the transparency that we are now seeing with a lot of artists speaking up about unfair record label contracts that they signed when they were very young and felt very pressured. You know, when you're very young and you are trying to make it, you will sign whatever gets you a spotlight and some money. There is a bit of a double edged sword to this because some people will argue that, there's always a price to pay for fame. And that, record labels, as much as they can be a little seedy, they also often do turn a lot of artists into multimillionaires, sometimes even billionaires. And so it's hard for, some of us to, especially independent artists, to feel like, oh, well, how do they have a right to complain when they still are making a very comfortable amount of money and they have made their fame so that their record label is basically obsolete. But that's not really the case. It's a matter of principle for a lot of artists. It's not uncommon historically for artists to want to re-record past albums and past hits. It's happened all the way since Frank Sinatra. So this has been something that, we've seen. However, we haven't seen in high-profile artists in the pop sphere like Taylor Swift in a little while now. And so Taylor doing this is definitely sort of, I think, reinserting that into the conversation around the pop sphere in terms of record labels. And it's really shining a light on particularly the young and vulnerable women who sign up to these record labels and feel very gypped out on something they rightfully should own. Taylor keeps trying to assert that she offered to pay for them back. She wasn't trying to just take something that was against her contract. She felt very outmaneuvered and manipulated between Scott and now having Scooter, someone she's never been a fan of. And I believe that there is some serious issues that have arisen from Scooter and people in his team in terms of negative attitudes towards Taylor and her friends. And it's really, like I said, it's driven this wedge in the music industry where you have people like Justin Bieber on one end, and then you have Taylor Swift on the other, and you have different artists flocking to one or the other. Unfortunately, it seems to be that it's a lot of a men versus women divide, as it seems like a lot of male acts are kind of not really stepping to Taylor's defense. They're, if anything, playing the middle or slightly more showing support for acts like Justin Bieber and for Kanye West. And they're not really looking to, Taylor as someone to defend because they're worried about retribution. Scooter has so much, if not too much, influence in the music industry, and so much, I don't know, so much seedy stuff about paying for streams for his artists. He's not the only manager to do this, but he's probably the most notorious for it in the current age. There's just something so sellouty about Scooter and everything that he represents. Not to mention, I'm not really a fan of almost any of the artists under his roster. I am, and I didn't mention this in my Demi Lovato review, which I made last week, but after I filmed it, I kind of did wish I had gone back and added it. The one big thing that I am very disappointed in Demi Lovato for in this whole journey of hers to coming back to the main spotlight and finding a new record label is that she signed with Scooter. I am very disappointed that she made that decision. However, you have to look at it from a nuanced position. She talks about in the documentary how she felt no one was going to take her on. No one wanted to sign a drug addict who had just massively overdosed and had a history of abuse. And she felt eternally grateful. She really propped Scooter up as this sort of overly generous saint figure who came in and picked her up when she was most vulnerable. And from Demi's perspective, I'm not going to dispute that. I do feel for Demi, and I'm glad that she is able to make music and stuff. But at the same time, I can tell that a lot of Swifties are a little annoyed with her for this. She has been very silent about the Taylor Swift issue with Scooter. And again, it's a little bit more disappointing when other women in the industry don't express solidarity for someone like Taylor. It's not so surprising that men like Ed Sheeran are going to not say anything. But for women who have especially struggled under the hands of the thumb of men in the industry, it's very upsetting to see them remain silent and, if not even, side with the opposing team. So, yeah, that's very unfortunate. I know that, people who are a little bit more middle of the road with this is thinking I'm viewing it way too black and white. Taylor is viewing this very black and white. You're on Scooter's side or you're not. And, it's an unfortunate reality, but it has just, even without the whole thing around Taylor's re-recordings and her masters, I just didn't get a good vibe from Scooter. And obviously I'm not a big fan of the acts and the songs that he tends to really support. His style of the genre and it's a very much in my definition of like downgrading quality of pop music today. But that's another video. I don't want to go too off the rails. I do want to preface this video by saying that I am not a Swiftie, like with a capital S by any means, with a TM at the end, like trademarked. I am not the hugest Taylor Swift fan in that I love all of her music and that I'm super, super invested into analyzing every single lyric and all of this. So that doesn't mean that I do have an affinity for her music, that I am very interested in talking about it, but I am not going to spend this entire video talking about all 27 songs on this new re-release in depth, especially lyrically, because if I did, this video would be 2 hours long. And I already have just so much stuff to talk about the concept and the story behind why we're being given this re-recording in the first place. I have a lot to say about that. So half the video is going to be devoted to talking about all of this. So just bear in mind, the second half of the video, I will dive a little bit more into the actual track lists. Because we've all heard these songs before, right? Except for the six new vault tracks. We've heard all of these songs before. Well, actually, in my case, that's not necessarily true, as there are a lot of songs, well, not a lot, but several songs, particularly on the deluxe edition of Fearless, that I had never heard before up until last Friday. And again, I'll explain why that is. Swifties, please don't come for me. I'm not a diehard Swift fan. When this album came out, I was not listening at all or really paying any attention to Taylor Swift. I was very much, listening to Lady Gaga's The Fame. I wasn't so much listening to Fearless in 2008. Like, just being real, that's where I was. That kind of music didn't seem like something that a queer guy like me would listen to. You know, it didn't have that sort of stereotypical fan base, so I didn't feel like it spoke to me. And now it's kind of interesting how I kind of regret feeling like I judged her music harshly back then to not listen to it. Because it wasn't until college that I started getting into it. So Taylor has decided to re-record all 6 of her Big Machine record label albums from her self-titled debut in 2006 all the way to her most recent album under that record label in 2017. So this is a decade of albums that she is audaciously going to re-record over the next several years. Now, her last album on that record label, Reputation, is only 3 years old as of this year, and contractually with her deal with Big Machine, she cannot re-record Reputation until 5 years have passed since its publishing date. So she cannot, at the earliest, start re-recording that record until the end of 2022, or at least release it. So we will not be seeing a re-record of Reputation anytime soon, which I am totally fine with. In my opinion, that's kind of the one album of hers I'm really not at all looking forward to a re-recording of, mainly because it is so recent, and also because it's kind of my least favorite record out of the Big Machine record label albums. But anyway, that being said, I was very I understood immediately why Taylor wanted to do this, and I was automatically on her side. But when she did announce this, I was very, very skeptical and weary about how this was all going to turn out. My biggest fear was, what if I don't like these new versions that she's putting out? There's a really big difference between artists reimagining old classics to do a new kind of album for it, like one of my favorite metal bands, Evanescence, did in 2017 with their album Synthesis. They reimagined all their classic hit songs in a new setting using different instruments, adding in different kinds of production. They kept most of the vocals the same, but they had some fun stretching out the composition. They weren't trying to immediately replace the old recorded versions, because that was a reimagining. What Taylor is doing is a re-recording, and there's a long legacy of artists doing this, as well as the reimagining, and the re-recording is geared to make the original masters obsolete. The Big Machine label records are meant to be pushed aside completely, especially when it comes to royalties for licensing in TV shows and such, because royalties are given to Scooter Braun now, because he owns them, if anyone streams those old recordings. And so this is a big financial decision for her. She is, she already owned the publishing rights. People might be a little bit confused. Well, how does she have the right? Of course she wrote the songs. Why wouldn't she own them? She owns the right to publish the songs. She didn't own the rights to take an example of, like, say you write a poem on a piece of paper, and that piece of paper becomes very valuable. The poem that you wrote is still yours, but that piece of paper that you wrote it on that specific date is not owned by you. It's owned by someone else. And then they, you have a contract with them. Maybe they, pay you to put it on a wall somewhere, but you don't own it outright. And what Taylor wanted to do was basically get a new piece of paper, write the same thing down on it, and stamp it. And now that Taylor, is in a position where she can do that financially, she can, do whatever she wants with Republic. She has a very open-ended deal with them, as far as I'm aware. So she has a lot of authority now, and she now owns not just the publishing and the licensing, but she also owns the master copies of these re-recordings. So this is really big. And I was, of course, it's an incentive for the fans to listen to the new version, and that's why in the title it says Taylor's version. It's a not so subtle, hey, look, this is the one I own. That one should say Big Machine label or Scott Borchetta version. It's not hers, even though it's her songs. And of course, again, if you're going to do a smart re-recording where it's actually going to have financial impact, if we want Scooter to not make much at all in terms of owning the revenue from royalties of owning those masters, if we want to diminish their stock value, which is another big part of this. If you make a copy of something, the value of that initial thing will immediately go down. especially if that copy is nearly identical. It's just basic, supply and demand. So Taylor is immediately halving the amount of value that those original re-recordings have for Scooter, which is a big slap in the face to him, which I can only imagine. I am so curious as to what Scooter is thinking, seeing this re-recording come out, being like, wow, Taylor actually did this. Dang, like I thought she was just bluffing. I have a feeling Scooter really did think she was bluffing back in 2019. He is probably shook. He is probably shook. And I am hoping, I'm watching the metrics with the charting and streaming. I am hoping that the streams are significantly higher now for Taylor's version compared, to the 2008 the 2008 one, because, that's the whole point. And it's retribution, and Taylor has every right to do it. And I don't think it's petty. I think it's petty what they did to her. So, you fight petty with petty. Plus, it gives the fans an extra treat. It also gives her the privilege of revisiting her old work, something that I think more artists could benefit from doing. A lot of artists, I feel like, they tend to forget about what they've done in the past, and sometimes they really try and distance themselves from it. Sometimes understandably, maybe there were some questionable things they recorded or did, but a lot of the time I find it a little disappointing that, artists don't tend to, especially with the deep cuts, they might talk about the singles because they have to. Madonna's always, no matter how much she hates talking about her big 80s hits, she's always going to have to sing them at some point. She just knows that that's what made her so famous. But is Madonna really going to put in the effort to sing a deep cut from an album 20 years ago? Most likely not, because she's moved on and she doesn't care, and she knows the public doesn't care so much about those songs, even though Madonna fans do. And it's frustrating as a fan to see artists kind of forget their old work, except for the big hit singles. And so I really like the forced sort of re-perspectivizing on her old material, including every single nook and cranny of it. She dusted out those books, those song books. She got the old touring band back together. She hit up Colby Kaye. I mean, she got all of these people back together, plus, a new engineering and mixing team. She did employ her new beaux in the recording studio, which is Jack Antonoff and Aaron Dresner. But thankfully, their production is very minimal. You don't really hear their style on this record, as I was fearing you would, because, of course, like I said, this is meant to sound like how it was produced and engineered back in 2008. So their role has to be more mimicry than their own style. But you do hear their approach on the vault tracks, because the vault tracks we've not heard before, and she could do whatever she wanted to with them, except of course she knew she didn't want to make them sound too out of character for 18-year-old Taylor. So it fits there, but it does sound a little bit more like what she would have done with Aaron and Jack now. And I'll talk about that. But Taylor talks about how beneficial it was and how fun it was, and also very emotional, to revisit all of these stories. I mean, some people would not want to read diary entries from when they were 15, 16, 17 years old. I personally find it extremely fascinating, and I am on definitely a huge nostalgia kick right now. And I cannot tell you how much I'm looking back at my teenage years and revisiting things that I talked about or wrote. And I, as a songwriter, could not imagine how exciting it would be to revisit work I made. I mean, I know I'd be cringed out by it too, because I think Taylor feels like she's improved so much. But, as a Taylor Swift fan who always viewed her country music as just creme de la creme, there was just something so undeniable about it, so innocent and beautiful, that I found a little bit lacking in some of her more recent pop stuff. I was always a little bit more of a country Taylor fan, and so it's a really big Christmas gift to all the fans from the beginning. Reputation stands might be a little like, oh, when does she get the 808s back? And I'm like, no, that Taylor is not coming to the phone. And at night, 2008 Taylor is on the phone now again, and you all need to deal with it. Why? Because we killed Look What You Made Me Do Taylor. It's gone back now because she's dead. Reputation Taylor is dead currently, but she'll be revived. Do not worry. She even went so far as to pay homage to the original album cover with a new photo shoot. I think it's a really beautiful mimicry of what she did back then, but a little bit more mature, with the sepia tone adding the nostalgic haze kind of aspect to it all. And I love the cover, and I love everything about this re-recording. I am so thrilled to say that because I was really worried that, I was going to feel very disappointed about what we got, in that I would want to prefer to listen to the old versions and then have this confliction of conscience, thinking, I don't want to give Scooter those streams. I want to give them to Taylor, but I don't like the direction that she took these. She Jack Antonoffed them too much. I was really, really worried. I was like, they better not ruin Breathe. They better not ruin Breathe. It's interesting because there's this artist, JoJo. A lot of people, I think, are familiar with JoJo, right? American recording artist. She did re-recordings of her 2004 and 2006 records. And I remember being really shocked because I had no idea I was listening to a re-recording, that she did these in like 2018, I think, of Too Little Too Late, one of her big hit songs, one of my favorite songs from, like middle school era for me. And I hated the new version she made. It just didn't sound at all like the original in terms of the production. And I was just like, no, 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 no. There's no nostalgia here for me. And it really ruins it because, unfortunately, they took off. For some reason, her record label completely erased from streaming her old albums. And I think that's a different reason why she re-recorded them. But I really wish JoJo had thought, maybe I should make these sound like the originals, because it's made me want to go out and just get the other older version from YouTube and put it on my phone. And so I've had to do that with her old music. And so I was really hoping this wouldn't be a situation with Taylor. But the JoJo situation is probably very different, even though there are always going to be similarities with record contracts and issues and people wanting to put out things on their own terms. But I think the JoJo situation was a little bit different, where she didn't necessarily feel the need to record them identically. But it, for me, didn't work very well for me because I don't want to listen to those re-recordings. And of course, luckily, Taylor is a smart girl and she knew not to do that. She wanted to go line by line, note by note, instrument by instrument. The differences are so subtle that you really don't realize. I mean, I'm starting to almost forget that they're new versions. Like, they sound so identical. The biggest difference being her own vocals, which was something she couldn't hide. Taylor has, matured. Her vocal cords have grown since she was 17 years old and she recorded this record. So naturally, she is going to have a slightly deeper, fuller, a little bit more controlled vocal. And that serves her really well on these songs. She still has the country twang that she can lean into. She has that idyllic sound, but it's just a little bit more mature. And I think it definitely is the nice little added sprinkle of improvement to a lot of these songs. On songs where you notice it more. Other songs, you just really don't notice that there's much of a difference. Some of the instrumentals are a little lusher. I would say that you can definitely hear a little bit more of the guitar work and the drums. It's just a better, fuller sound on a lot of them. That's not to say that the old versions sounded bad or messy or muddled by any means. They also sounded very clean, but there's very little difference. So I no longer have a reason to listen to the old versions. I'm sure the old versions will still have a lot of plays in the initial period where people are listening to both and trying to pick out the differences. That's to be expected, but after a while, we are going to completely forget they existed. I forgot that you existed, basically. That's what we're saying here. And I have already replaced them all on my phone. I deleted the night before all of my Fearless songs. I will confess I had not bought the whole album back before then. This was the first time I had the full album on my phone, and including all the bonus tracks, which a lot of Taylor Swift fans were happy to see were not actually led at the front of the record, because for some reason, Spotify and her re-release, because basically Fearless was released in November of 2008, released on November 11th of 2008. Those were the first 12 songs. It ended with Change. It started with Fearless. Then a year later, on October 26th, 2009, Taylor decided to add another 6 songs to the record and call it Fearless the Platinum Edition. And that Platinum Edition put Jump Then Fall at the very top of the track list, ending with Change. That's not the proper order. I don't know why her label decided to do it, or she decided at the time to do it that way. So it's nice to see Fearless at number 1. She released Love Story, Taylor Swift re-recorded, back in February. So we got our first teaser of what this was going to sound like. And I was very anxious. I was like, how is this going to sound different? Or is it going to sound the same? And that was what we wanted. We wanted it to sound the same. But of course, just subtle differences that couldn't be helped, which add a little character and charm to it. And Love Story actually, it's interesting because a lot of us expected her to start with her 2006 debut record, her self-titled. I was a little bit surprised when she chose Fearless as the first one to re-record. Um, I think that I think that she's trying to go through these in order chronologically, but for some reason she started with Fearless, and maybe that's because Fearless, even though her self-titled was her debut, Fearless in some ways was her debut to like critical acclaim. It was her first Grammy award-winning album, and it was just sort of like that. It basically had the song Love Story, which was the big hit song that gave her a lot more attention. Fun fact, Love Story was one of the first Taylor Swift songs I ever heard and the first Taylor Swift song I ever bought on iTunes in September of 2008, along with Change, which was released as a promotional single. So yeah, Taylor Swift is introducing us again to Taylor with the song that a lot of the general public heard her for the first time with. Because her self-titled, yeah, it didn't necessarily do the same level of acclaim and numbers back then. It was more after the fact that it got more famous. So with that being said, I think Speak Now is going to be the next one that she re-records, but who knows? I've heard rumors that it might be 1989 and she's just going to sort of pick her own order to go through this. I heard someone say that they think it would make the most sense for her to end with the self-titled, so sort of start full circle at the beginning. That way she can say, this is Taylor Swift, and kind of end it there, because Taylor Swift, Taylor's version is a bit redundant. So I've seen people say that she might do that. It's just the circuitous route that she might do to get there. We obviously know Reputation isn't coming until at least 2022, so it's not coming this year. And I will say this, I do hope that she doesn't go, I mean, as much as it doesn't really matter, Taylor has been working extra hard, like extra hard over the last couple years. It's absolutely insane. I saw some sort of a lot of people are really upset with Lorde, the New Zealand singer, for not really putting out any new music. And like by now it's been about 4 years. Someone compared, Taylor Swift has released, I think, 80 songs, not including this re-release, which just came out since Melodrama came out by Lorde. And people are like, and we can't compare artists, right? It doesn't mean one artist is lazy and one is blah blah blah, but it's hard. I have the same thing. It's like I do look at a lot of my favorite artists and I'm like, and then I look at Taylor and I'm like, this person hasn't given me music in over 5 years, and this girl's given me, she's just gorge feeding us with content. And I gotta be honest, it's getting to be a little too much. I'm getting a little tired of Taylor. When Evermore came out, I was like, I don't know, Taylor, it's too soon after Folklore. These albums are quite lengthy. I just can't get into it. Not to mention it's too similar sounding to Folklore, but in my opinion, a little bit less inspired, not as strong. It's not to say it's somewhat grown on me in time. I know my Evermore review is a bit controversial. I will link it in the description, as well as my review of all my other Taylor Swift albums that I have covered on this channel, which does not include Fearless, because I never got to record that one. But yeah, Taylor, I don't know. I'm kind of curious how the release schedule is going to look going forward. Is she planning on doing it every 3 months or something? Or is she, I think an ideal timeline would be maybe to do 2 re-releases in 2021. So she did one in the spring. Maybe she could do the next one in the fall, then maybe do another one in the spring, another one in the fall in 2022. I mean, in the middle of there, she's probably going to put out another album of original material. That still is a lot. Some fans will be like, no, we're going to get all of them except Reputation this year. I'm like, this year? It's already April. We've got 5 more re-recordings to do. Well, 4, not including Reputation. I'm like, this means she's got to already be telling us when the next one's coming. We haven't gotten an announcement for that yet. I just, and then of course on top of that, Taylor Swift fans are like, TS10 is coming, TS10 is coming. And I'm just like, be quiet. Imogen Heap has not released an album since 2014. You should be grateful. You should be grateful that you're getting so much content from your faves. I mean, there are so many artists that, yeah. I mean, it's great. Kate Bush has not released an album in a decade. All right? Yeah. Okay. With all that being said, I definitely do not feel too much Taylor Swift fatigue listening to this re-recording. After all, it's, re-released versions. We've got 6 new songs. it's a healthy amount. It's not overgorging us, even though it's a quite lengthy album when you put it all together. And yeah, believe it or not, some of these songs are new to me beyond the vault tracks. Though I will say that most of every song on the original, actually, I think it's 13 tracks on the original Fearless, I had heard at least 30-second snippets of. Because, you know, way back in the day, I used to just kind of, I still do, I just cherry pick albums with iTunes snippets. And I'm like, that sounds kind of good. I'll buy that song or I'll listen to that song again. And now, you know, and it's interesting because over the years, like I said, the first Fearless song I heard was Love Story along with Change. And I loved both those songs. Then I also heard You Belong With Me, but I never bought it because I saw the music video when it came out in 2009. And then I heard White Horse because that came out as a single sort of at the end of that era. And then let me think, did I hear any other songs? You know what? I don't know. I think I heard 15. I also watched the music video for 15 at some point in high school. It didn't feel like the music was for me back then. I was, you know, I felt like this was made for popular girls on the field hockey team, you know, who I didn't feel like, you know, I just didn't feel like it was for me. And I wasn't into country music at all. So it just, my taste for Taylor hadn't evolved yet. And then, believe it or not, it wasn't until college, many years later, when Red came out, when Red came out, I realized I needed to focus on Taylor Swift, that I needed to stop sleeping on her. And so I went back and heard a lot of the great other songs from her Fearless album, her debut, and Speak Now. One of those being my favorite song off of Fearless, Breathe, the co-written track with Colby Kaye. That song has been with me for so long now. But of course, it's been with Taylor Swift fans who have listened to Fearless OG for a lot longer. And so I have to tap my hat in deference to that. The Best Day. The Best Day is another song that jumped out to me. And that I heard more in recent years, though. It took a while for me to finally listen to a lot of these songs. I believe I had also listened to Hey Stephen at some point, didn't think much of it, and, you know, went on my merry way. It's funny, I always got Taylor Swift's Steven song confused with the Steven song by Kesha. I'd heard that song before, and they both have a song about someone named Steven. It's kind of interesting. But with looking at the track list now, there were several songs I'd never heard the full versions of. I had never heard Tell Me Why before. I had never heard You're Not Sorry, The Way I Loved You, or Forever and Always. So yes, Taylor Swift fans are probably going to be like, what? And I will say for Forever and Always and for The Way I Loved You, I admit my shame. Forever and Always stood out to me the most out of the newer songs that I had not heard before, just because the melody, it just had a very sing-song, innocent, free-spirited nature to it. The Way I Loved You has a charming melody line that just is so wrapped up in the memories of a relationship that's fallen apart. There's just a real fervent energy to it that I think is very infectious. But a lot of the other songs didn't really stand out. I mean, Hey Stephen, that like I love that. That's so charming and childlike. It's the kind of song that it really speaks to 15-year-old Taylor, like that girl who's just, you know, soft and sweet but catchy, and she's also just very deft with her pen, writing lyrics that I think for a 15, 16-year-old are quite mature, quite wise and witty. And she just effortlessly owns these guitar laden melodies. The Best Day really stuck out to me. I mean, I've not listened to the Fearless version in quite some time. This is about her mom, and it's just such a beautiful tribute to her. And it's something she could have easily written on folklore. There's so many parallels to particularly the track 7 that I see the growth that she's taken with just this innocent, nostalgic guitar work. I'm just so in love with the melody and the nostalgia, the sepia-toned gingham picnic table memory of childhood. It's just so bucolic. And it makes me think of my own childhood, as I am very similar in age to Taylor. I was 15 when 15 came out. When this whole record came out, I was 15 years old. And speaking of 15, I will say that this record entirely does make me think a lot of high school. And it makes me very nostalgic. And for that, I am just, like I said, further burrowing into that hole. And like I said, I love it. And I will just, again, since I've never formally talked about Breathe on this channel, why do I love that song so much? Something about the way Taylor just so brilliantly and brutally honestly describes the ways relationships are so transient and fall apart. People are people, and sometimes they change their minds. It's just the most brutally honest line, and I know other artists have been, like, writing stuff like this before, but for me, Taylor just owning the honesty and sincerity and also the maturity. I feel like at that age, when you're so young, you're not gonna look at things from that perspective. You're gonna victimize yourself so heavily, and that's not to say Taylor doesn't do that sometimes, but the way that, Taylor describes the death of a relationship at that age, I think is very, very mature. It is not something that I think most people before the age of 20 can wrap their heads around. Because, yeah, romance can be very fleeting, and you have to accept that. And that's not something we want to accept, but we unfortunately have to do it, and we have to just breathe. There is something so calming, so soothing about their vocal harmonies, the melody of the song, the breeze of the guitar. It is just absolute perfection, country pop perfection from Taylor and Colby, and one of my all time favorite Taylor Swift songs. So, the 2009 deluxe tracks, I'm not really going to spend too much time talking about them, but I will say Come In With the Rain, You Can Come In Any Day. This is a song that I am, criminalizing myself for having slept on all these years because I am all about this track, the melody of it. Jump and Fall deserves a shout out for just being so boisterous, sunny in sound, and yet very cautionary. It's a perfect blend of, teenage romantic frustration. A lot of these songs do start to follow a similar sort of pattern, and when you get so many of them, the banjo compiled with this similar, very triumphant, melody that is recognizable, but they start to sound the similar after a while. So by the time I get to songs like The Other Side of the Door, I just feel like I've heard it on other songs preceding it better. But they all are a vibe. If I want to put the whole record on, I will listen to the entire record. There's not really any sort of brazen skip. There's no blaring skip song on this entire project. Today Was a Fairy Tale is a song that I inadvertently heard quite a lot when I worked at AC Moore. When I did retail, Taylor Swift can definitely be very heavily played on some of those radio stations. So that down, was just like always in the back of my mind as I was restocking shelves. And it's just a little bit too reminiscent of that for me. So when I listen to that song, I can't help but think about restocking shelves at AC Moore late at night. But at the same time, appreciating it for what it is now in MP3 form, it's such a beautiful romantic song. I think it was originally for a movie that came out in 2010, which is interesting that she actually put it on this version because Today Was a Fairy Tale was never originally put on the 2009 Platinum Edition. It was never originally bought and bundled with Fearless. A lot of people were thinking, well, then if she put that movie song on this from that era, why didn't she put the song Crazier from the Hannah Montana movie, which came out in 2009, where she has a beautiful song on that record. And I did listen to Crazier when it came out, actually. I loved listening to that song on the way home from school. It's just a really great melody. But apparently, that is one of the only Taylor Swift songs that is owned by Disney Records. So it's not, Scooter doesn't own it. It's a completely different thing. She can't really do the same thing with it. So we're not getting a re-recording of Crazier, but it's still a gorgeous song. I highly recommend it. Some people would put it on this album just to make this album 30 songs because it's from the same era. Okay, so, oh my gosh, and now we still gotta talk about these vault songs. We got You All Over Me with Maren Morris. I'll be honest with you, it was the first vault song we heard. It didn't do a whole lot for me, but it's grown on me with time. It's a simple, understated melody. We're starting to hear a little bit of that Aaron Dresner and Jack Antonoff backing wobble production, which is fine because we still got the guitars, we still got the country down-to-earth strumming the guitar vibe overriding all of it. Mr. Perfectly Fine is the one that everyone is going crazy over. And of course, what's kind of awkward but very interesting about Taylor re-recording these songs is she is singing about boys that have very long since moved on, and she has also obviously moved on. And a particular boy who a lot of songs on this record were about is Joe Jonas, the popular Disney Channel star from the Jonas Brothers. who is now happily married to a woman named an actress named Sophie Turner. And it's actually quite hilarious because this song, she wrote it in 2007, 2008 about Joe Jonas. And she never eventually put it on the record, but it's always been kept in a diary somewhere. And it's entirely about Joe. So it's a little awkward for Sophie and Joe to listen to it now, but Sophie thinks it's very hilarious and interesting and fun. So they bantered about it. I think that's very sweet. I don't see anything juvenile about the sound of this song compared to her other records. I don't think that this song would have been out of place on Red or on 1989. Like, it would have fit on almost any record. Lover, it would have fit on that one as well. She's always had that very specific lyricism describing someone in sort of an overly complimentary way, which you can tell is dripping in sarcasm. I mean, the sarcasm is just oozing off of the page, and coupling that with like a very simplistic melody and a very sort of carefree attitude in the way she delivers the song. And the juxtaposition of those two things, like the very witty specificity and the kind of carefree nature of the melody, I think pair very well. Make them, it's the trademark Taylor Swift, relatable but obtuse enough to keep you thinking, but always something you can sing along to. So the problem is by the time we get to a lot of these vault songs, I'm a little Taylor Swift out. And We Were Happy is one of the songs that really sort of suffers from that. The melody doesn't really rise up to the occasion so much, and there are just other slower songs on the vault that I think capture that emotion a little stronger. On That's When, she collabs with Australian country singer Keith Urban. Yeah, I think you can tell that Aaron Dresner is getting a little bit more creative freedom in the backing because we've got some ambient instrumental stuff going on that you wouldn't have heard on the track proper of Fearless. And it's an interesting blend of honky tonk country sounds with indie alternative rock. Hey, it works. It's something we're getting used to hearing from Taylor. And so it fits. And a lot of country music can get very reverbed out and synthetic sounding. It's very popular in modern country music. Very popular in modern country music. We've got a little bit of more of that 80s, like 1989 propelling hook to Don't You. It's a little more sensual, but like rhythmic. I don't know. It picks it up a little bit, and it's a little more crepuscular sounding than a lot of the other songs. I mean, a lot of these bonus tracks do sound a lot more nighttime compared to the, sunny, rope swing into the creek kind of carefree, hazy day, summer day of most of the Fearless record and how it sounds. Kiss Me in the Middle of the Pouring Rain, Don't You is a little more seductive and soft and with that 80s instrumental, and I find that very alluring. So for that reason, Don't You is my favorite of the 6 songs we've gotten from the vault. Bye Bye Baby, it's fine. Not really much to say about it, to be completely honest with you. Like I said, if I wanted to go into the lyrics of all of these songs, this video is already horrendously long. So I had to just say my initial little thoughts about some of the songs I really enjoyed. But yeah, I think Mr. Perfectly Fine and Don't You, those are the strongest vault tracks for me. And then from the songs, new songs that I'd never heard before, but have heard for the first time in full length off of this re-recording, that really impressed me would have been Comin' with the Rain, The Way I Loved You, Jump Then Fall, and Forever and Always. Because of course, all of the singles off of this record are just perfect. They're just so untouchably good, from White Horse to Change. I love the sounding of Change. I mean, Change just has this like really angsty, utopian view of things that I think is so idealistic and starry-eyed, that you should never fully lose. And it's a great way to close out the record. But like I said, the bonus tracks definitely add the treat. And I'm really excited for records that I have a lot more to say about. I think Fearless it's a record that, like I said, it speaks of a lot of maturity for someone in their teenage years. But I think she gets even stronger on a lot of songs. Maybe not necessarily always melodically, but I just feel like in the songwriting, she's only progressing. And she gets even more, deft with the poetic schemes that she uses and the biting word choice. Like, it just becomes a lot more punctuated and a lot more thought out. But that's not to say that the grassroots for that was not already very well planted on this project. And so, all of that being said, I am very happy that this album sounds exactly like we expected it to, and exactly like what we heard before. That's a weird thing to say. That's usually not what we want to hear from an artist. But in this case, that was what we wanted because now we can delete, and I highly recommend you all do this, delete your old 2008 versions and just replace it in your playlist with these new ones. And hopefully, over the coming years, we will be able to do that with all of Taylor's first 6 records. Though, like I said, I'm not really feeling the need to do it with Reputation so much, but it is what it is. So I'm hoping we get Speak Now next because I'm really excited about that one. And I have not reviewed Speak Now on this channel. So I would definitely like to talk about that. Although it will be a little different because I have Speak Now on CD. So it's going to be a little harder for me with that because I don't want to necessarily go out and buy a new CD. Not that much of a Taylor Swift fan. But I do have Red and Speak Now on CD. And so, I mean, on my phone, I will definitely be streaming the new ones, but I will always have those CDs. But if you listen to the CD, you're not giving Scooter any money. So think of it that way. You know, if you own Fearless physically, you can listen to that all you want. It's the streaming, it's the online listening, it's the YouTube. You want to make sure you're doing Taylor's version, even though I did delete Taylor's version from all the song titles because that's a little much. Takes away a bit of the romance and the poetry of the song titles. I would think it's a little clumsy, but I get why she did it in the marketing of it. So with all that being said, I hope I did not disappoint any Swifties who stumble upon this channel. I have some controversial Taylor Swift opinions. This is not a Taylor Swift stan account by any means, but I do really appreciate her and her music, and I will always have an ear in for what she is doing, and I do look forward to more of these re-recordings. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I will link in the description my review of some of Taylor's more recent records, along with Red, because I have covered that album on this channel. So Folklore, Lover, Evermore, Reputation, Red, all be linked in the description. And I hope to see you all in my next video. I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day. Peace, love, and light. Bye.